Hello, class. Welcome back to Federal and Indian Gaming Law. Today we have a guest speaker, Abby Ferris, who's Vice President of Legal Compliance at the San Manuel Band of Mission Indians. Prior to that, Abby was at Las Vegas Sands Corporation as the Executive Director of Legal Compliance there. Was also at Caesars for regional operations. I believe you're at Wynn as well. I had the good fortune of working with Abby at Lionel Sawyer and Collins back a while back.
We won't say how long ago.
And it's truly a pleasure to have her here. And this class wouldn't exist but for the support of San Manuel and Jake Coyne in particular. I don't know if you've met Jacob Coyne.
Yeah.
Jacob's a fantastic guy.
I just met him last week for the first time.
Wonderful guy. He helped plan this class.
Oh, that's very cool.
If you see him again, tell him I said hello. He's hard to get a hold of.
Yeah. Well, the next time you teach it, I think I'd like to take it because it's sort of like a big learning curve for me going into tribal for the first time. It's, a whole new world of things to learn that I only sort of knew at the very surface level before, but actually working in it's completely different.
And I think, in the gaming space, this is where you're going to see a lot of growth and a lot of job opportunities with tribes. As tribes expand and become more, I hate to say more professional, but more corporate-like in some aspects.
Yeah.
And they are expanding beyond agri gaming into commercial gaming.
Yeah.
It seems to be the next phase of Indian gaming.
Yeah.
So with that, Abby, I'll turn things over to you.
Cool. Thank you, Greg. As Greg mentioned, we've known each other for a really long time, and you're lucky to have him as a professor. He's probably one of the smartest guys I know, and I'm sure you've had an awesome semester. But this is fun for me. I usually teach undergrads who are studying in a casino management program at the University of Southern Mississippi. And we get to talk about AML, but at a very sort of 10,000 foot level. We don't ever really get into it. So I think this is going to be fun because AML is really fun to me. It's not something that I ever thought I would enjoy. My background is in operations. I worked as a marketer of all things in gaming for about 10 years before I even went to law school. So I've always worked in operations and sort of gaming regulatory compliance areas. And I always thought, oh, it must be so boring to just have to do AML all day, but it's really not. It's really fun, especially if you like working in casinos and the operation of, the financial services that go on in casinos. It can be really exciting and interesting. So I'm not awesome at Zoom. So if you guys give me a second to share my screen. I'm failing at that. It says host disabled screen share. Got it. Okay. Okay, so I think you guys can see my screen now. So I just have a few slides. I don't have a whole lot of slides. I know you guys already, know the law and what it is, so I'm not going to bore you by regurgitating that. You can listen to it again. I hope that what I can do today is share some of my practical experiences with you, because it can be really sometimes sort of abstract and difficult to understand money laundering and how it happens in casinos. And I think the best way to learn about it really is to have a conversation about it and talk about it and go over real life scenarios. That's certainly how I learned about it. I had really no real background in AML when I pivoted that way and learned it, from scratch, like sort of in the trenches. And I think that helped me learn it quickly and well. And it, like I said, it's really fun. So let's get started. So I know you guys know all this. Modern casinos offer all kinds of stuff under a very highly regulated sort of bubble. There's hotels and dining and entertainment. And most of the patrons that come to casinos come for entertainment and dining and, diversions and gaming. And they come to, do everything legitimately. They're really just there to have fun. But there's a very small percentage of them who are not, who are there to either engage in illegal activity or sort of hide the proceeds of illegal activity through the financial services that casinos offer. So because casinos offer financial services like banks, we've been defined as financial institutions under the BSA since, I think, 1985. So as a result, we have to file currency transaction reports, or CTRs, when someone engages in a transaction over $10,000, so $10,001 or more during each gaming day. And that's either, a single transaction or cumulatively. And we also have to file SARs when we know or suspect or have reason to suspect that a transaction or an attempted transaction or a series of transactions or attempted transactions that aggregate to $5,000 or more either involves funds that were derived from illegal activity, is intended to disguise funds or assets that were derived from illegal activity, designed to avoid record keeping and reporting under the BSA, if the guest is using the casino to facilitate criminal activity, if the transaction has no economic, business, or apparent lawful purpose, which is kind of a catch-all for things that you can't really define very well, but it's not right. Or if it's not the kind of transaction that particular patron typically engages in, and you have no way to explain why they're doing what they're doing. If it's, completely out of character for that patron to be conducting that transaction, you can't figure out why. So money laundering is, and this is where I think it's helpful to talk about real life scenarios, because this is sort of esoteric. The process of changing money obtained from crimes into origination from a legitimate source, or engaging in financial transactions to conceal the identity, source, or destination of illegally gained money. So it really, money laundering has the sole purpose of turning ill-gotten gains, the proceeds of crime, into cash or property that looks legitimate and can be used without suspicion. Money laundering first kind of became a hot topic during Prohibition, in the battle against organized crime. And it's evolved over the years, particularly since 9/11 and the shift in focus to preventing terrorist financing, to include any financial transaction that generates an asset or value as a result of an illegal act. And that can include tax evasion and false accounting and fraud and pretty much any criminally derived funds. It can involve money laundering by individuals, drug dealers, embezzlers, businesses, corrupt politicians, corrupt business people, members of organized crime, of course, still, and even, states, and not like US states, but foreign states. So the sort of the big list of money launderers is always, arms sales and smuggling and drug dealing and organized crime. There's a lot of focus nowadays on human trafficking and the effect that it has on money laundering, and that's especially important for us in casinos and hotels and resorts, because we're a little more susceptible to that type of activity than banks or insurance companies. But basically, it's just the criminal, the individual or the criminal enterprise, trying to find a way to use the money that it's gotten illegally without arising, like getting suspicion, I guess, or tipping off the cops to the fact that they've got this money, why they have it, and that they're using it. And it's just trying to disguise the source. You can do that by changing the form or moving the funds to someplace else where they just attract less attention. So there are 3 steps in money laundering, and this is a very sort of abstract concept of how money laundering works. And in real life, it happens, each scenario can be very, very different and can happen in different ways. But for the most part, it involves these 3 steps. The first is placement, and that is putting the money into the financial system, whether it's, taking your dirty cash and somehow getting it into a bank, which isn't always easy. Getting it into a casino, which also isn't always easy, particularly if it's cash and we can't figure out where it came from. The second step is layering, and this is where it can get really, really complex, especially with really sophisticated money laundering operations and, you know, big criminal enterprises that have multiple shell companies and offshore corporations and, you know, businesses, not really operating, but businesses located in jurisdictions that don't have strict tax reporting, where they can sort of surreptitiously move things around and you know, create transactions among their businesses that might not be real or might be, you know, slightly different from what is represented on the accounting books. And that just kind of creates confusion. So anyone who tries to follow the trail can't really figure out where it came from or where it went. And then once you get it all, you know, into a place where it's all mixed up and nobody can figure out where it came from, then you integrate it back into the financial system, and it looks like it's legit. You know, the money appears to be clean because you've created sort of a plausible explanation for where it came from. And you're able to use it to buy real estate, luxury assets. There's a lot of attention nowadays given to art and antiquities. So real estate and art and antiquities these days is kind of a big thing. But the thing that's interesting about casino money laundering is a casino can be involved in all three of these steps. It's not just in the placement phase when the money goes into the financial system, although that certainly is, you know, a lot of the time how it starts. Depending on how the patron treats its transactions, it can also be part of the layering if the property allows payments to be made to third parties or to businesses or from businesses or third parties. And it can also be part of integration, because part of money laundering is also just taking your ill-gotten gains and spending them and being able to enjoy it. So, you know, a casino can really be part of all three of these steps in a way that's a little more direct than, say, a bank, which certainly can be involved in all three, but it's sort of like a step of removal. So it's, you know, typically you don't see the really, really complex layering taking place in casinos, or if it's happening there, we at the casino don't have visibility into the whole of the layering structure, but we can see part of it. And I don't mean that it doesn't ever happen. It certainly has happened here in Las Vegas to some casinos, including one that I worked for pretty recently before I worked there, to pretty significant negative effect. If you're curious, you might want to Google Joe Low, and it's J-O-H, Joe Low, L-O-W, and the 1MDB scandal. He's, you know, still on the lam, and the Goldman Sachs bankers who helped him do what he did are still getting in trouble, and he's hiding out. So it's kind of an interesting story, and it involves, you know, Hollywood stars and all kind of people. And interestingly, probably a little ironically, he used part of the money to finance the production of the movie Wolf of Wall Street. I mean, it's like you could make a movie about Joe Low and it would be so fun to watch. And probably not just if you're a nerd like I am about money laundering. So all three of these steps can happen in casinos. And just because, you know, I said, we don't tend to see ourselves a lot of the highly complex layering, doesn't mean that money laundering doesn't happen in complex and difficult to identify ways in casinos. So the basic money laundering typologies in casinos are structuring, which you guys probably know about. It's breaking up large cash transactions into smaller ones so that you can avoid the CTR and other reporting requirements of the BSA. And I always think the funniest thing about structuring is that most people who engage in structuring aren't trying to hide criminal funds. People have funny notions about wanting the government to see what they're doing with their money. So they structure their transactions to avoid the CTR. And by doing so, ultimately end up not only in having a CTR filed, but also a SAR, because we're now reporting to law enforcement including the IRS, that they've been doing this stuff. So it's like, come on, guys, just let's just do this like grown-ups and deal with it. Small bills transactions are large cash transactions conducted in small denomination cash. We typically treat small denominations as 20s or lower. We interestingly saw a huge spike in small bills transactions right after we reopened after the pandemic shutdown in June 2020. You may have seen in the news a lot of news reports about, sort of dirty cash stacking up on the West Coast in Southern California, because, illegal businesses didn't shut down because of the pandemic. They still, happen, prostitution and drug dealing, things like that. But those people who engage in that criminal activity didn't have any place to take their cash to launder it. So it sort of stacked up over the months, and people had huge stores of cash, and the FBI was busting people with rooms full of cash and small bills, typically, especially for drug dealers. So we saw a big influx of small bills transactions right after we opened back up. And it's still, they're still sort of elevated. But the important thing to remember is there are also people with legitimate all cash businesses that end up with small denomination bills. So it's just part of the sort of tightrope of trying to understand who's laundering money in the casino and who's not. Minimal gaming is bringing cash into the casino and buying into a game and then not really playing and cashing out. So you've converted your dirty cash into chips, or, for slots. Bill stuffing is sort of a subset of minimal gaming that's slot specific. People bring cash in and just, stuff it into the slot machine and, play, a spin or two and then cash it out. And suddenly they've turned their dirty cash into a Tito ticket that they can take to the cage and get, sorry about the poodle. He's not used to be working this early in the morning, I don't think.
It's all good.
And so you've turned it into a Tito ticket, and suddenly you've got cash that came from the casino and not from your drug dealing business. Offset betting is where two or more individuals, and you see people working together in a lot of these scenarios, two or more individuals get together and they plan to bet both sides of an outcome of a game. So, you get your friend and you go play Baccarat, and I bet banker and he bets player, and, you just always play the opposite of each other. And by the time you're done, your cash is kind of all gone through and you're probably about where you started out, maybe a little better, maybe a little worse. And then you take it and you've got chips, and you change it at the casino, you've got something completely different than you started with. Chip pushing and sharing is exactly what it sounds like. And it's kind of goes hand in hand with third-party payments. This is basically people paying for other people to game, either because they don't want anyone to notice that they're gaming. So, pay someone else, they play for you, essentially. You can also be, for corrupt purposes, paying someone else off. That happened here not too recently with an LA City councilman who was coming to Vegas pretty regularly and sort of paying and having his games paid for by some property development people in LA County and construction companies. And it was all part of an illegal kickback scheme for awarding contracts to these developers in LA. That was kind of fun. He visited Venetian when I was there, as one of the stops that he and his friends made in Vegas pretty frequently. So we got to work kind of closely with law enforcement to give them all the information we had about their activity at the casino. It was kind of fun. Walking with chips is another thing that can be hard to detect. It's not hard to detect people walk with chips. It'd be hard to detect if they're walking with chips for a bad purpose. We had this one guy who would come in. He lived in Southern California, and he would come to Vegas every 3 weeks or so, and he'd take out a $20,000 marker and put the chips in his pocket, and walk around with him. We found out ultimately after we dug into it and tried to figure out what he was doing. We just put him in his pocket and walk around with him until it felt right. And when it felt right, he'd take the whole $20,000 to a roulette table and put it on black and bet it on black. But if we hadn't dug into, what he did over the course of the week that he was in Vegas, it looked like he was taking $20,000 in chips and not playing it and just, walking with it. And who knows what people are doing with chips when they leave the casino in, significant quantities. So we kind of had to dig into that and have a conversation with him like, okay, I know this is your superstition and gamblers are weird sometimes and they have really strange superstitious activity. But next time, wait until it feels right and then come get the chips and that'll be fine. Dormant front money accounts. A lot of casinos allow patrons to open up front money accounts to play. Sometimes they leave the money there. And sometimes it's, totally legit. They are running late for their trip to the airport. So they leave the money in the account. They're like, hold it, I'm coming back in a month and I'll play it then. Sometimes people take illegal money and put it into a front money account in a casino just to hide it and kind of store it for a while. So you have to keep a good eye on people's front money accounts and what's in them and how long it's been since they've had activity. And the last is sort of my favorite. We've been dealing with it a lot lately, and it's something that the U.S. attorney has been paying a lot of attention to lately because it's happening a lot. And that's informal banking, or, basically sort of unlicensed money service business operation in the casino, which isn't in and of itself criminal necessarily. And the patrons who are using unlicensed money service business, just random people as their banks aren't necessarily doing anything criminal. But you don't know where the cash they're using is coming from. And sometimes it comes from, a totally legit all cash business in town. But sometimes maybe it comes from drug cartels or, you don't know where it comes from. But this is, we see this a lot in casinos where you see guys come in, and it's typically working with Chinese nationals because China has some pretty strict currency restrictions and you can't take a whole lot of currency out of China. And they come to Las Vegas and they don't have any way to get cash to play with. So they hook up with these guys who have cash. Again, we're not always real sure where it comes from. And you see them, meet up in the casino on the casino floor, and they have a little conversation, and then they get on their phones and they do like a little WeChat exchange. And the guy with the backpack takes the cash out of his bag, hands it to the customer, and they go their separate ways, and the customer goes to play, and the guy with the backpack goes off and, has another meeting with another customer. They're starting to get, DOJ has started to prosecute some of these cases, so they're getting a little smarter about it. You see them, meet up on the casino floor and they talk, and then they go into the bathroom, and 2 minutes later they both come out and go their separate ways, and suddenly one of them has a lot of cash. So it's something that's happening more and more, even though, and the people who are doing it are getting smarter about not getting caught. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with that, in the near future. So one of the things that makes it most difficult to figure this stuff out in casinos is a lot of the time, the 98% of the people who are in the casino legitimately just to have fun and not doing anything wrong are doing a lot of this stuff for completely legitimate reasons. And in order to be able to effectively report through a SAR to law enforcement when we think money laundering might be happening, we have to figure out which of those people are the ones who are doing it for bad purposes. And the best way to figure that out is to understand why they're doing what they're doing. So there are a few goals for laundering money in casinos, and these are sort of universally applicable. The first is to conceal the source of the money or the identity of the person who has it, to convert funds to a form that's less traceable or more convenient to use, turning those small bills into larger bills that don't attract as much attention. Transferring funds from one person or place to another, third-party transactions, informal banking, cleaning the money to make it look like it, came from something legitimate, like from a legitimate casino game. To spend it, it's also laundering money just to take your dirty money someplace and spend it. So yeah, just spending bad stuff, and to store funds outside the traditional banking system. So if you look at all our typologies, most of them involve more than one of those objectives. Structuring, of course, is to conceal the owner. Small bills transactions, you want to, convert it to a different form and also spend it. You can probably add spend to most of these. Minimal gaming is also, converting and bill stuffing, converting and cleaning it. It comes out and looks like a Tito ticket that you got at the casino. Offset betting, same thing. You want to take your money, you get together with your friend, you come up with a plan. I'm going to bet for the Saints to win because I'm a Saints fan and I believe that every day they're going to win. It's not true. And my friend bets for the Saints to lose, and we're, ultimately it's going to come out over time as kind of a wash. And it just looks like the proceeds of sports wagering. Chip pushing and sharing and third-party payments. You're going to conceal who it's coming from. You want to give it to someone else, probably for an improper purpose if you're a bad guy. Cleans it, and you can also spend it. Those guys who were coming from LA weren't just there to sort of, pay and accept their bribes. They were there to have a good time. And, they would stay all weekend and party and live it up. And, they had a great time being corrupt. Walking with chips is, changing the value from cash to a casino instrument, and storing it outside of the banking system and, bringing it back and using it differently. Same with dormant front money accounts, just, kind of hide it away, make it come out looking like something else. And informal banking is, transferring and spending. So that's a lot, right? It's a lot, and it's hard to figure out who's acting bad and who's not. So the first step in creating an effective AML program, and everybody has to do this, is to do an AML risk assessment. You have to do it annually. It doesn't often change very much from year to year. You sort of do your initial risk assessment, and then you update it annually based on changes to the business, changes to who your customers are, if you're starting to offer different services. It has to be tailored to each specific casino venue. So there shouldn't be just like an MGM AML risk assessment, right? Every property is different. They offer different products to different customers. And so they each have a different AML risk profile and have to have their own AML risk assessment. And in the risk assessment, you look at sort of these 5 categories of things and evaluate what your risk is and explain it in this report. First is location. So, some of the risk that comes from operating in Vegas is we're a significant drive-in destination from Southern California, which is a high drug trafficking risk area in the US. We also, are an international tourist destination, and we welcome visitors from all over the world, including countries that have lots of money laundering that takes place there, and political corruption and things that makes it a little riskier to accept their money. You contrast that with, like Horseshoe and Hammond, Indiana. They don't have international visitors from, really risky and dangerous countries, but they do get, big spenders from Chicago. So they do have some money. They don't offer the same kind of games that someplace like Wynn or Venetian or Cosmo might offer. They don't, they're not going to have $500 slot machines and, like high limit Baccarat and things like that, like we do at Venetian, or like we did, I don't work there anymore, sorry, like they do at Venetian. And then somewhere in the middle is the company that I work for now, Yamava in Southern California. Their guests are primarily domestic, so they don't have the concern with, people coming from bad countries with potentially corrupt cash. but they exist right in the middle of the high drug trafficking risk area in Southern California. So it's, you know, every casino based on its location has different concerns and risks to deal with. And you have to figure out what those are for you, set them forth in your assessment. Second is enterprise. So risk assessments, you know, it's not just for casinos, all financial institutions have to do it. The enterprise for casinos is, you know, the risk is that they're cash intensive. Casinos are very cash intensive. Transactions happen very, very quickly. And they're open 24/7. So you know, it's a different type of risk than you would have from a bank. That's the enterprise bit. Products that you offer. So this kind of goes back to what we were talking about before. Venetian, Wynn, Cosmo offer, you know, very high limit baccarat games and games that are going to bring in larger quantities of cash than, you know, the fairgrounds, racetrack, and slots in New Orleans that has, you know, might top out at like a $10 slot machine. You know, that, so you're offering different products present different risks. The other is the financial services that you offer. And there's a wide variety of services that casinos offer. There's some of them have check cashing and credit, and you can wire funds in and out, and some have safe deposit boxes and front money accounts. And whatever your mix of those products is going to create a different level of risk. And finally, your customers. So, you know, I keep using Venetian because that's probably my most recent work experience. Venetian welcomes a significant number of international customers who play high stakes games. Horseshoe, Hammond, Indiana has a different set of customers, and they don't take the same kind of action. So, you know, if your customers are coming from very corrupt countries with lots of cash, that's a much bigger risk than, you know, someone coming from rural Indiana on a Saturday night to spend a few $100 on slots. No offense to rural Indiana, I sort of enjoy. So you take all that information and you create a risk-based AML program. And these, and I apologize, this is sort of a text heavy slide, which I hate, but I kind of wanted to get it all in one place. So the requirements are a system of internal controls, policies, and procedures to assure ongoing compliance. Everyone's got an AML policy. You know, the policy sets forth, you know, the idea and the governing notions about how we treat AML, and the procedures are often very, very detailed steps that a variety of operating departments across the casino have to take to recognize potential money laundering and how to treat it. It's credit and the cage and table games and compliance, obviously. And now, even with the focus on human trafficking, it can even involve housekeepers and frontline employees that have access to areas where human trafficking type activity might be noticed. So it really it affects more people now in casinos than it did even when I started doing AML like 3 or 4 years ago. Internal and or external independent testing for compliance, so audit. Most casinos have internal audit. Those who don't hire external auditors to come in, and they have to audit the effectiveness of the program, sort of the quality of the program and its effectiveness. Appropriate ongoing training of casino personnel. So, you know, most people do AML training position-based and role-based. It can vary, you know, the training curriculum itself can vary depending on who's being trained. Every year for casino personnel, and there's really just sort of in the compliance community in general, not just gaming or AML, there's been in the past few years a focus on also evaluating the effectiveness of the training. So it's not just giving some training to everybody, but also gathering the data to show that they've understood it. Not just that they've completed it, but also that they've understood it and know how to use it. And there are lots of companies that provide some really interesting training curriculum now. It's kind of cool. An individual or individuals charged with assuring day-to-day compliance. So that's your AML officer. In most places, it's the compliance officer. It just depends on the AML program and how sort of structured and sprawling it is. Sometimes they're very sprawling. This is kind of a new one, to assure compliance by using automated programs to aid in assuring compliance. So that's, using the technology at your disposal to pull data out of the casino management system and analyze it and figure out where money laundering might be happening that a human hasn't seen take place with their own eyes. And we use that a lot to identify things like bill stuffing. Because unless a slot attendant notices someone engaging in that activity, there aren't dealers around to see it. And other, like pit bosses who might keep an eye on someone's odd behavior. And bill stuffing can be really tricky because unless they're crazy or really stupid, the money launderer isn't going to play with a player's card. So you have to look into the data coming out of the slot system to see where there might have been a lot of cash put in and then very little play on that cash. It's hard to ever understand who did that when they did it. There is some software nowadays. I'm thinking of one in particular that's like a slot floor optimization program, and sort of as a side effect of the fact that it helps you optimize your slot floor, can give real-time data that shows bill stuffing when it happens. And you can use that to sort of alert surveillance and let them know that not very many people use that software for that purpose yet because it's a slot floor optimization program. So it's, someone needs to like break out the compliance portions of those applications and sell them as compliance things. And they're not cheap. I mean, they're expensive. So you do the best you can with the technology that you have. But it can be really fun too. We did, right before I left WIN, we hired a data scientist, and put together a patron risk scoring model that sort of built together, I think it was 419 or 20 different data points from our different systems, and even pulling information like country risk scores from FATF, from the FATF website, and gave each patron, each of the 9.5 million patrons in the Venetian players card system, in the casino system, a risk score, and would show us regularly who the riskiest patrons were, and if there was a change, if someone engaged in some behavior that like was really strange and it kicked them up, we could take a look at them and see if there were, regularly, to see if there's a need to dig into it a little further. So all the stuff that's happening with technology and automated programs is really, I think, probably the most fun that's happening in AML right now, and people are doing some really interesting things with technology. And finally, the last bit is procedures for using all reasonably available information to determine who the person is, if you need to, whether to file a SAR, and if you need to make or retain any other records under the BSA. And this is the meat of what the AML analysts do in the casino every day. And it can be really tricky, and sometimes it requires some pretty, complex, nuanced analysis to figure out who's acting wrong and who's acting right. So the first way to do that is through Know Your Customer, KYC. You've probably heard it, KYC. And we do that, learn who our customers are, even when they, sort of don't trigger the form. You go to a bank to open an account, and the KYC is, you fill out a form that says who you are and where your money comes from. Casinos do those too, but sometimes player behavior or transaction behavior can tip us off, and someone that we didn't necessarily ask about at the beginning, we can dig into a little further. So we look at, their identification and verifying that it's real, which seems like a simple step, but it's really important. Because people do come in with, fake IDs all the time, and you want to make sure they're not, sanctioned on the OFAC watch list or, criminals. We look at the source of the wealth and the source of the funds. So source of wealth is, where do their assets come from? What's their business? Do they have inheritance? Where does, sort of the larger body of their assets come from? Source of funds is where is the particular cash that they're handing you right now? Where did that particular cash come from? We look at business association, specifically ownership and control, because you want to understand if the business they're telling you as a source of their funds is a shell company, or if it's, somehow not legitimate in some way. Personal associations, do they hang out with loan sharks and bad guys? Sanctions is, are they on the OFAC list? Criminal history is interesting because we're not just looking for people who have criminal background, but people who have criminal backgrounds that might make them money launderers. So, and this is going to sound terrible, and I hate to say it, but like, if you committed murder, that's okay. Did you go to prison and serve your time? Yeah. If you, paid your debt to society and your crime wasn't a crime of fraud or deception or something that might indicate that you could be laundering money, then it's probably okay. And some people have some really interesting criminal histories that have nothing to do with financial crime. We look at negative news. Is there, have you been in the news lately for shady business practices or, corruption related things? Do you have a lot of tax liens? Someone who has a lot of tax liens sort of indicates that they aren't really very good at paying what they need to pay when they need to pay it. Enforcement actions from regulatory agencies, people who are licensed to trade in securities and things like that. Have they gotten in trouble with regulatory agencies? And if so, have they, paid their fines and paid their debt to society? We look to see if people have fiduciary obligations. So if you're, a trustee and in charge of someone else's money, that's a thing. Attorneys, people who have trust accounts. Cannabis businesses can be tricky because, as you know, they're legal in a lot of states, but it's still illegal federally. FinCEN has sort of said, do your due diligence, and if you're comfortable taking the money, then take it. But gaming regulators have a different approach, so it's cannabis businesses is an interesting thing. And then we do enhanced due diligence where it looks like we need to, an ongoing due diligence if we're sort of comfortable with the patron, but there's something outstanding, like they've got a lawsuit pending. If you want to wait and see, or a criminal indictment that hasn't been fully prosecuted yet, like we'll let you play, but we're going to wait and see what the outcome of this matter is. And I know I'm running out of time. I said I wasn't going to talk very long, but I couldn't help it. And then we also monitor transactions. Cash in, do you have a lot of cash in, but not corresponding play or cash out? Do you have a lot of cash out, but not a lot of CTRs? Check cashing and cash advances, where's the money coming from? Structuring, of course. Large jackpots, playing with no card, you're trying to remain anonymous for some reason. Third and multi-party payments, that's who's paying for you and why, and payments from businesses, which can always be a little shady. But at the end of the day, you have to take a holistic view of the patron and look at all of the behavior they engage in, the gaming, the transaction behavior, everything they do in the casino, to try to figure out if they're legitimately just at the casino to have a good time, or if they're up to no good. And that's, sort of the fun part of it to me. So I know I talked forever, and I'm sorry, I feel like I talked at you guys. But if you have any questions, I think we have a few minutes. I'm happy to talk about whatever you guys want to talk about.
How have things changed during COVID?
So the biggest change during COVID, or that we saw after COVID, was the huge spike in small bills transactions, and in cash transactions generally. People bringing in cash either because they have, cash intensive businesses that they couldn't spend for a while, or if it was the proceeds of criminal enterprise that they couldn't spend or launder for a while. That was the biggest COVID change. We also have tried to pay attention to the possibility of PPP fraud, which can be kind of hard to see in a casino, but it's something we're trying to, track and be mindful of.
Morgana, you have a question.
Yes, first of all, thank you for your presentation. And I want to ask about cryptocurrency.
I
So,
knew someone was going to ask about cryptocurrency. So it terrifies me, not least of all because I still don't feel super comfortable that I have a firm grasp on it. I think I'm getting there. And I haven't, it's not a huge concern yet because most people can't use crypto in a casino. The thing that gives me the most concern now about crypto is the crypto ATMs, that people can go to the ATM and convert their crypto to cash and bring the cash to the casino. And we have no idea, that it came from crypto, or if we do, why they had it or where the crypto came from.
but then the liability would be from the payment companies, right? Like they have to do
Yeah.
their KYC
Yeah.
and AML, and then the casino wouldn't have any problem with that.
Well, I mean, it adds a layer of protection for sure. But I don't think that we'd be able to push it off 100% on the payment companies. But it hasn't really happened a lot yet. So it'll be interesting to see, how that sort of takes form and takes shape with regard to the, shifting of liability potentially.
Thank you.
Other questions? Get an expert in front of you right now. This is the time to ask. Courtney.
So again, yes, thank you for your presentation. I'm not super familiar with this field, so it's very interesting. And a lot of what you were describing sounds like basically police work. So I'm wondering how your lawyer leads in.
So there, at Venetian, we had a lot of lawyers in the compliance department, more than in the AML compliance specifically, more than most operators do. And that's because in 2013, Venetian got in a lot of trouble. And they decided to really sort of build what would be a best-in-class compliance program. And they stacked the department with lawyers, and for a long time did, had the luxury of doing really full investigations on patrons and situations, and doing full legal analysis on what was happening and how it needed to be treated under the BSA. Since 2013, the program at Venetian it's still a very good program, but it was incredibly strict. I mean, it was before my time, but from what I understand, it was like a huge clampdown on patron activity at Venetian in 2013. Since that time, it's sort of come back to center. So the operational departments have more freedom to run their departments the way they want to, with oversight by compliance all the time, of course. But it's risk-based, right? You have to look at the risk and evaluate what you think the risk is and what your appetite for that risk is. And you develop the program that, keeps everyone on the straight and narrow. Sometimes it's, can you bring them up to the ledge without falling over, and, let them operate the business without going to jail? And sometimes it takes a lawyer to understand what's going to send you to jail and what's not.
Eugenia, you have a question. Oh, your microphone is off.
With a machine. Okay, my question is, are there casinos now that either do have or are required to have an AML department to try to keep track of this particular area?
Oh yeah, they all are.
Okay.
Everyone is required to have it. And in fact, it's not just, we're not just required to have an AML department. We're required to make sure that it's staffed sufficiently to be effective and funded sufficiently to be effective. It's it's a big priority now, bigger than it was, just a few years ago.
So when you say that everyone has it, is it required within the industry, within the particular casino, or is it a state regulation?
There are some states that have some AML requirements, but mostly this freaks my students out because we spend all semester talking about how it's state law, state law, state law. This is a federal law requirement.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it. And thank you very much for your presentation.
No problem. I like talking about it.
Sorry, I have another one. So of course that everyone tries to do their best, but money laundering still happens here in Nevada. Is there anything else, in your opinion, that you think should be done on top of SARS and CTR and everything else?
I don't know if there's anything different that should be done. Every operator and every operating company has, a different appetite for risk, and they create the program that, is best suited to their operation and how it works and the risk that they're willing to take to run their business. I think that sort of enhanced relationships with law enforcement, it could be helpful. At Venetian, we work very closely with law enforcement all the time. It's important, in addition to having a program and, reporting SARS when you have to, and CTRs when you have to, that you take that extra step to collaborate with law enforcement to help them accomplish what they're trying to accomplish. And also to make sure that you're, reporting well and not just reporting because you have to. But I don't know that there needs to be anything necessarily different from the current reporting structure.
Thank you.
Abby, have you seen any cooperation between operators with regard to AML issues?
Yeah, and that's actually really interesting. So Section 314B of the Patriot Act allows financial institutions, including casinos, if they participate in the program, to discuss patron activity with each other without risking legal liability for, sharing patron information to someone else. And it's really, there's a lot of cooperation among properties on the Strip who participate in 314B because it sort of behooves everyone to find out if their patrons might be laundering money in their casinos too. And that's kind of fun. There are industry groups and, people get together and, talk about best practices and audits, when audits are happening, what's the IRS looking for? How can you help them? How can you make your audit go smoothly? What other operators' audit findings might be, so you can adjust your program to make sure that you're in compliance with what the IRS thinks you need to be doing. It's a really collaborative community.
That's good. That's come a long way, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. And, sometimes you do a 314B request and you don't necessarily hear back for a while, but for the most part, people are really, interested in working together and making sure that, nobody's breaking the law in their casino, because nobody wants to get in trouble. It's bad for business.
Austin, you have a question.
Yeah, is it the same sort of reporting and monitoring standards for, say, like MGM properties over in China? Because MGM is a American company, or do those properties operate under like Chinese law?
They operate under Chinese law, and Singapore has its own laws too. There's something analogous there. It's not the same, they don't have to report under American law, but they do have to report under law that's very similar.
Courtney.
I'm just wondering if you could share, like, and if not, it's okay, like a story of maybe a recent time you've caught like a bad guy in the act and how.
So I guess, well, so the informal banking was a really big one. And that was really fun, and it took a while to, first of all, notice that the activity was taking place. And obviously, you know, the guys bringing in the cash are not people we know. They wear caps, they, you know, try to hide their identity. But that whole investigation was really fun, you know, watching it and trying to identify the patterns and then, you know, identify who the people were. And, you know, we started watching their license plates when they drove their cars into the garage and watching them come in and, you know, give cash out. Sorry, I live downtown. It's really loud sometimes. And just sort of putting that whole investigation together piece by piece was a huge puzzle. And it was so rewarding to like get to the end and be done and realize like there's this whole thing happening and we just figured that out and reported it to law enforcement and now they're acting on it. But that was really fun. I also recently had a situation, I guess there are two. There was a guy who started coming to the casino and he started playing all over the Strip. And he came in with, I think $30,000 or $40,000, not a whole lot. And when he filled out his form, said that, you know, the source of his wealth was that he was a trust fund baby. Okay. He, as the surveillance guy said, he looks like a suspect. Like he was like, just looked like a criminal, right? He came in and started winning. We got sort of comfortable with his initial buy-in and he just started winning and winning and winning and winning and winning at Baccarat. Like every trip, not every hand, but every trip, every like session that he played, he won. And nobody wins at Baccarat 100% of the time because that's not how math works, right? So he just kept winning and winning and winning. And he would come back and every time he came back, his buy-in would be bigger. And from a money laundering perspective, we were kind of okay with it because he was only buying in, his buy-in was only increased by the amount he had won on the previous trip. So he was bringing back cash that came from us. So we knew where it came from, even though we couldn't really find anything out about this guy. And those are the scary ones, are the ones that you can't find anything about in public sources and criminal records and court filings, because it's the really good criminals who don't have any paper trail of anything anywhere. He had a business, like they called an entertainment, I think he called it business, in South Florida, and the business owned a lot of boats. And that was disconcerting because South Florida is a high drug trafficking risk area. And what do you do with a whole lot of boats in South Florida? Miami Vice, right? You bring the drugs back and forth. I'm showing my age when I say Miami Vice. So we couldn't really figure out anything about this guy. And he would kind of create a spectacle. And, you know, over time, he won like 30 million from us. He turned his 30,000 to 30 million. And I kept calling surveillance. I was like, nobody wins at Baccarat all the time. He's doing something. Is he cheating? Is he working with dealers? Is it advantage play? I don't know what it is, but it's not right. And they said, no, we're looking, it's fine. Everything's on the up and up. Sometimes people just get lucky. I don't know how I feel about that. So it went on, and he started getting banned in other places up and down the Strip, not for AML reasons, because everybody else had the same trouble trying to figure out what this guy's story was that we did. But because he was such a jerk. Like he would come down from his room in his bathrobe and want to play Baccarat and high limits and was yelling at people and smoking cigars. Like he was just a jerk. And we started to look into him, and he was clearly trying to build a social media persona and become some sort of influencer or something. So he would like win and ask for $4 million in cash, because it's not safe. You don't do that. Well, we knew that the $4 million came from us. So we're like, if you want in cash, take in cash, just go into your room upstairs. And the cage would call and say, why does he want $4 million in cash? I'm like, I guarantee you, because he's going upstairs to take pictures of himself in the bathtub with cash to post on Instagram, because he was trying to build, this thing. And that, of course, is exactly what he did. Pictures of stacks of cash and him laying in the bed covered in cash. I mean, it was nuts. And he had sort of a secret Instagram account that we found, and you had to be in the know, and we clearly weren't in the know to get all the details, but it seemed like he might have been hosting poker games in his hotel room. And finally, like, we just couldn't get, he was bringing all of our cash back to us all the time, and we were just giving him more of it. But finally, he was such a jerk that we got to ban him just for bad behavior. Usually when you give $30 million to someone, you want him to come back so you can kind of get some of it back. And we just needed to be rid of this guy. He was awful. And he kind of disappeared for a while. And then he came back. No, this is right before we banned him. He disappeared for a while, and he came back and was playing in low amounts. Like, what's he doing? And again, he kept winning and winning and winning. And then he posted something on social media about, he came in that second round with like a little mini entourage. And one of the guys in his mini entourage gave him the cash to play with. And that was the first time that we didn't understand where the cash came from, really. And later that night, he won fairly big on that trip. And later that night, he posted on social media that he was playing with other people's money to use his Advantage Play system to make them money. And it was Nelly and a baseball player who I don't remember because I'm not a big baseball girl, but he was posting these videos online from his hotel room in Venetian about how he, was an Advantage player and had a system, and you needed to invest in him so you could, grow your money, and he would, grow your money for you, playing Baccarat by his system. And we're like, that's it, you're out. Like, we don't know whose money you're playing with. You have to go. So finally, we were able to get him out that way. Plus, he had just been a jerk, so probably not surprisingly, on that trip. So we finally got rid of him, and that was kind of fun. Just, people do crazy stuff, like really crazy stuff. And then there was one right before him, two guys who were cousins from New York, young, like 22 and 25. And they made a couple of trips with like real big buy-ins. Like, one of them bought in for 2 million and one for 5. And they played, and one would lose and one would win. And they also, were pretty annoying. But, people come in with that kind of money, and I think they feel a certain level of entitlement to act a certain way and, get a certain level of service. And yeah, we'll provide you with the service, but don't be a jerk, And the only thing we could find about these guys, and it seemed odd, the 22-year-old was the CEO of this finance company, and the 25-year-old one was too. And it turned out that they were, it was pretty obvious that they were like straight mobbed up loan sharks, right? Like, their finance companies were basically payday loan companies for small businesses. But there was nothing, bad on paper. They're like, yeah, we own this company. We did litigation searches and found where their various companies had been sued in civil court for, bad lending practices. And, we're able to put the pieces together, but they had this web of lending companies that were like, sometimes you could tell that they were related, but sometimes not. Here we go with the, confusion with all the different companies. But we couldn't find anything criminal on them, except when they were like 16 and 19 or whatever. There was a news article from New York, where they're from, where they literally like shook down the ice cream truck guy. And we're like, okay, these guys are like mobbed up load sharks. They're terrible. And we finally had a third party company do a report on them. And it's a third party company of course, they found nothing on paper like we did, but they go out and also do in-person interviews with people who know them or work with them to try to find out what their reputation is and what the risk was. And across the board, people were like, they're loan sharks. They're terrible. You got to get rid of them. So, I mean, we had to rely ultimately, I mean, it was a hunch and we knew what was happening, but we couldn't really like substantiate it in any way other than the shakedown of the ice cream man. But we got, you know, some interviews with people who work in the industry who were like, they're bad. They're loan sharks. They're not legit. So we were able to deal with them, but it took a while. And we, you know, they came in and played a couple of times before we had enough to be able to like really get rid of them. But that was kind of fun. So don't shake down the ice cream man. People are going to know what you do.
Other questions? Hearing none. Abby, thank you so very much for being here today. Really appreciate it. Presentation's fantastic. Appreciate everything San Manuel does for us as well.
Yeah, it's a good organization. I'm really glad to be there. And I was really glad to talk with this stuff with you guys too. Obviously, I really like it. It's kind of fun. But if y'all have any questions, please, you know, send me an email. I'm happy to answer anything you want. And if you're curious about AML, I would encourage you to, you know, get involved with it. It really is fun and interesting, especially if you do like working in the gaming operation and in the casino, because it allows you to really get deep into it and be a part of it. And in addition to, you know, compliance work and legal work. So it's really fun.
Yeah, and it seems to be an area that's really growing. So if you're looking for a career in gaming, often it's a great thing to focus on because there's a fair amount of need there.
Yes, absolutely. 100%.
So certainly don't discount compliance opportunities when they come along.
No, don't, for sure. Don't.
It's a great opportunity when you've got it.
Yeah. It's
So again,
fun.
Abby, thank you so very much.
No problem.
Really appreciate it.
Thanks, you guys.
And for the rest of the class, tomorrow is review. So we're at that point of the semester already. No class on Wednesday, but class tomorrow. So come with questions and we'll talk about the exam and we'll see you tomorrow.